Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to another edition. Okay, cool. Wangechi is online.
Hello there.
Hello. Hi,
How are you?
Wangechi.
Hi. Hi there.
Hi.
Hi, dear. How are you?
I'm good.
I see you.
Hi.
This is
Hi,
good.
sweetheart. Hi,
I
hi,
have to wear this to
happiness.
cancel out the noise, but I'm sure.
I
How are you?
Yeah, it's okay. I'm great.
Good.
It's so wonderful that we are doing this. Thank you
Oh,
very much for your time, for indulging in this process. I know it's not always easy. It seems so easy for people
hmm
who listen to us and they don't know that we've been practicing for the last 2 weeks. So
It's nice to see you. Thank you so much.
welcome to
Thank you.
another head. Thank you. Welcome to another head-to-head, the series of conversations that Zeitz MOCAA has been organizing over the past 2 months with various thinkers, makers, producers in the art field, in our art field on the continent. And I am absolutely thrilled and pleased and honored to be speaking to one of our important queens of the art, Mutu. We get to the matter of things, to really jump straight into the matter. I will begin by, I know that, for instance, your artistic, you spent your formative years of artistic training and political consciousness in the US. I mean, you earned your undergraduate degree in art at the Cooper
hmm
Union, and then you went on to graduate school at the Yale School of Art. You've lived in New York for the longest time, and I totally see in your practice how much the US, the American environment has very much informed your work in regards to the female figure, so to speak, the female Black body. And at the same time, I also believe that uh, the US being a very special context for Blackness and for a Black experience, uh, there there are significant differences in, informing your practice in a specific environment. And I know that you moved back home a couple of years ago, and that you are now working out of Nairobi since about 4 or 5 years. And I have to tell you that I jumped in the air when I heard that you moved back to Nairobi. I hope that this will encourage other, important artists from the continent who are living outside the continent to consider establishing their practice wherever they want on the continent. So it's really very important. It's a significant move. I guess my first question to you, subject matter that is mainly your subject matter, the female Black body in its multiplicity and diversity and spirituality.
hmm
How has the the migration back, how has it informed? How has it changed? How has it impacted your practice since you're back?
Right. Thank you, Koyo. And you've actually made a layered question and layered statement.
That's for you to speak for a long time.
I'll just grab at whichever one comes first. And really, the first thing is to say this is actually a very significant conversation. First of all, because I love talking to you, and I'm actually honored to be on this platform, and I'm proud that you are leading the Zeitz MOCAA Museum into the direction that we hope it goes towards the big ship. And there's a lot of work, and there's a lot of amazing moving parts. So I'm really happy to be having this conversation, because there's this tentacle that you're throwing at me from South Africa, from Cape Town all the way to Nairobi, is actually a very important one. I think for me, it's not just significant because you've been doing this during COVID time, but also because these conversations need to happen. And that is the main reason I established the studio in Nairobi. I wanted to attach myself back to a conversation that I wasn't even sure I had when I first left as a young woman. So I left to go to school. I went to high school, left when I was 17 years old. And I was gone for 2 years. I came back for a year, and during that year I worked and fought in Lamu. And it was there that I had these incredible dreams at night. I was living in this really rural, beautiful house, and the ocean was there, and all of the night spirits and the bats would come and haunt me. And actually, that's where I realized I had no choice but to leap out of my home, out of my mother's space and world, and go find what it is this artistic craving was. I also felt, this was like the early 90s, and I felt this deep and unfathomable quiet about life around me, about Kenyan life. I was raised during the 70s and 80s, and we transited from the Jomo Kenyatta years into Moi years, and it was a really strange time to grow up as a young woman, because I'll give you an example. We had, the second president of Kenya never showed up anywhere with a spouse, a daughter, a girlfriend, or a partner, or somebody next to him. So this was a singular male leader. Many things during that time, when I was a teenager, when I was growing into my body, into myself, and trying to figure out what it was to be a young woman in the world in Nairobi at that time, were unanswerable. There was a lot of silences, there was a lot of quiet, there was a lot of censorship, there was a lot of detentions of journalists and writers and creatives and people who spoke up. And all of that, without really kind of digging into it and figuring out, well, what do I do? It eventually came to a head, and I decided to pursue my art, pursue it where I could possibly, do it. I applied to schools in different places. So anyway, I know that the desire to make art comes from within my body and within my deep discomfort at the time, being a young woman. There was this kind of contradictory energy, because on the one hand, the powers that be was male and masculine. But really, the people who spoke up, the people who impressed me, the people who did the most work in my family life, the people who I saw were motivational and encouraging, were women. So in some ways, these are the kernels of the beginnings of my fascination with not just the female body or woman or femininity, but what is it that is propelling this sort of imbalance in power? So it's such a distinct imbalance in power. I was a witness through TV, actually live, and in the news, to the amazing riots that were pushed forward through Wangari Maathai's work. And these came out of political protest, but it was political protest for the children of these women, these mothers, who had disappeared in places that we were unspeakable. You know, again, these are things we were told to hush, don't speak. You know, don't speak, you'll get into trouble. So in some ways, I was looking for my voice, I was looking for my body to sit somewhere comfortably and be itself, be able to speak and heard and so forth. But I also know, Koyo, that that as I emerged and arrived in the United States, as much as I had come into a place where speaking up and being present and being visible in New York in particular was an impressive, amazing, important thing in art classes and in the groups that I was part of and so forth. I was very alone and alien in those environments, right? And so these discussions of race and these discussions of ethnicity that were quite absolute. I mean, I remember, I also have to say, I came into, you know, I was at Cooper Union during Thelma Golden's amazing exhibitions, you know, the Black Male Show, her Whitney Museum Biennial.
Yeah,
all
Black
of this,
Male.
yes, and there was, you know, Fred Wilson. I worked with Fred Wilson in his studio, and you know, he was mining the museum. He was capturing, you know, these phantoms and bringing them out, and artists and curators, and affected by how the proclamation of themselves through the institution, through the work, and through asking the institution to take responsibility, right, for these secrets. And that's where I really began to understand what not only the voice can do, but the body can do. But I think I always went back to woman, back to the female body, back to my own body, my own discomfort and my own love of being a woman, a young woman. And I'm trying to sort of come back to it and say, you know, honestly, I started off looking at women, painting women, sculpting women, and I continued, and the way I continued was almost like a journal of my life, you know. So I actually studied sculpture at Yale, and it was this. This is actually really significant because in a way I've never really sunk my feet into material and sculpture the way I have coming back to Nairobi, right? Coming back to this environment. And it's primarily because the materials speak to me. The materials speak to my hands. The materials speak to my eyes, my ears, everything I see around me, I react to. And I think it's this deep memory. And I think there's some deep impetus to sort of exorcise these stories have taken place primarily through the violence that has been, right, the silence of pain of our country, of our people. And to this day, I don't think we've actually created enough space, dignified moments to talk about this pain. I think we're still hiding the pain in fear of rupture, in fear of civil strife, in fear of being arrested, in fear of being found out. And so the rebel in everybody, the whistleblower in most people who want to speak up is always, you know, fighting with the energy of what was set up, which was, we shan't speak about what's happened. We'll be okay. We'll be the stable country. Let Uganda do this. Let Nigeria do that. But we'll stay stable, but quiet, right? And I don't want that silence anymore. It's heavy. It's stifling. Yeah. It's painful, as I said. I'm going to keep using this word because it's true. And it's unnecessary, you know. It's happening right now in the United States, which has been happening for a while. You know, if you really think about this kind of...
Because I would like to dig a little bit deeper into something that you mentioned, which really resonates with me. And you started speaking, you spoke about how your own being as a young Black African woman was the calling, the you know, the urge for expression, and the power of the female models you had around you were more informing of your
My
human
reality, yes,
development, if I
absolutely.
can
Yes,
use that word,
yes.
you know, reality as anything else. And it reminds me of, you know, I mean, uh, I like to usually say that I am a product of matriarchy, because I was born and raised in a female household. And when I say female household, you know, the so-called traditional, even though it's not traditional, it's totally contemporary. We are more or less of the same kind of age, and we were growing up in the 70s on the continent.
Exactly.
And at that time, you know, the disillusion of independence has not settled yet. So what I want to say is that there is this at least for me, and this is, I think, also what informed and motivated me to become what I am today and doing what I'm doing today, is there is this sense of, you feel this very strong inner female power that we have, and
Absolutely.
particularly Black women, you know, in a sense that I am sure, and it doesn't exist in other cultures, just by the very mere fact that our existence in this world, Black female has gone through, be it, you know, now or 1,000 years ago or 500 years ago, there is this strong body transmission. And when I say body,
Undisputably,
a kind of body
absolutely. Yes.
transmission, there is this strong physical transmission of physical memory,
100.
and
Yeah.
in a very direct and abstract way.
Yes.
You know,
Absolutely.
and I strongly believe that this is something that conscious,
Or unconscious.
sensitive,
Yes. Yeah. Yep. It's in there.
alert, or unconscious, alert Black women of whatever background, be you from the US, from Brazil, from Europe, or whatever, sooner or later it catches up with you in any form
I
or
totally agree.
ever.
Yeah.
So
And Koyo,
yeah.
No, but I love where you're going, because
Go ahead.
this unfathomable prowess and deep understanding of humanity, which is basically compassion, right? It's been sitting in our bodies
Exactly.
for
Yeah.
longer than 500 years. I mean, this is where we talk about the breakage, right? It's been sitting in our bodies, and we hold all of the DNA, all of this information, all of the strength, right, of the core human race, really. I mean, and we really have to be proud about that, not in some kind of you know, strange. I'm not even thinking about science. I'm thinking about the depth with which we dig in order to understand how to maneuver in a world that is constantly trying to make less and less space for us. And look how much space we've been able to make. And look how much space the women in my life were able to make. I mean, and almost every person, not just women, you talk to, they will first address what their mothers have done for them, right? And how they've held them. And I think that ability to sculpt a human from within, right? To begin to form this kind of incredible being is undisputable, right? And of course, there's going to be all kinds of controversy about what that
Undisputable,
means.
ungraspable, and I necessity, this urge, this kind of urgency to reclaim that power.
Correct.
You know,
Yeah.
and to reclaim that power on all levels. And I see, because social level, there are a lot of activity, and there, a lot has been achieved. You know, I mean, you and I wouldn't be able to be here speaking to each other, COVID or not COVID. We wouldn't be able to do what we do today if our foremothers, you know,
Hadn't done
didn't
what they
do
did.
so
Correct.
much work
Yes,
for us.
I
And we
agree.
still have a lot, you know, and we still have a lot of work to do.
Yes.
I totally agree with that.
Yeah.
But what I want to address with you also is that the reclaim or the reclamation, I don't know if you say it in English, the
Yeah.
reclaim, the reappropriation of that power is something that is paramount. It's paramount
100%.
because it is only through that recognition that, you know, we have that power, and that we can, and power not in a stupid kind of
Exactly.
vile way,
Exactly.
but power in
Yeah.
terms of knowledge,
Yes.
power in
Yes.
terms of knowledge, power in terms of consciousness, you know,
Power in terms of
power
healing,
in terms of confidence,
yes,
you know.
absolutely.
Exactly, and also power in terms of healing, very, very strongly. My heart is every time broken, you know. It's so much
I mean,
in
isn't that
within that.
that's the
So
genius of
yeah,
patriarchy, really, is that it undermines us to the point that you will undermine others, right? I mean, you don't even have to have a man around you. Your loss of confidence has been transferred through this genius of patriarchy. And that's how colonization worked, you know, this destruction of, first of all, you know, older people, you know, some who survived, some who didn't, but that trauma that they held, in some way it was a breakage, right? And I think for me, that's where art becomes the salve, right? That's what I used art for, first and foremost. And I have to say, it started off with me. It was the thing that that brought me peace and understanding and calmed my mind enough to realize that this thing that I was pursuing, this language I was looking for, this history, this like lineage that I was a part of and desperately trying to make sure I stayed connected to, not only was it inside of me, that I could work it out through these mediums, through cutting, through repurposing images. And in some cases, I was honestly just really vandalizing and destroying what I felt were lies about whose history is more interesting, whose land looks like what. I mean, the kinds of magazines and books I was destroying were, I felt, the most fictitious and probably the most destructive of all, in terms of how much they disseminated information about things that not only were not true, but undermine the confidence and the integrity and the dignity of Black people, of African people, right? But I think what's happened with sculpture, which is something that I'm honestly really trying to grapple with, and I'm glad you're challenging me, and I've been asked before, and I'm like, is I think what's happened is it's the soil. I think it's the land. I think it's the plants. I think it's those.
It's interesting that you say the lands. It's interesting, Wangechi. It's interesting that you said the land, because I've been looking at your work for the last 10 years. And for some reason, and this is a nice that we speak, female figuration that you have produced and sculpture that you have produced over this time, I see, as much as they are diverse and different and they address different topics and different contents, I see the same figure coming back, and it's one of Mami Wata. I see Mami Wata everywhere, sort of going, it's, you know, this amazing deity, you know, go kind of running, present in your entire oeuvre. So it's interesting that you speak about land, whereas, you know, Mami Wata, of course, is a deity of the ocean,
right,
of the water.
right.
So what do you think about that?
Well, I mean, you know, I'm a Highland girl. I'm from up in the mountains. Our people are Highland and mountain people. And somehow, I don't know how this siren of a woman ended up on a river, and I ended up in the mountains with my people. But I have a distinct comfort and love of water, and I think it goes back to my time on the coast. figuring myself out, swimming every morning, really engaging in some, you know, spiritual awakenings in the water, which I had no explanation for, because I didn't know, you know, which narrative, which myth, which thing to grasp onto. But the beautiful thing about the time at the coast too is that there's such layered, deep and frightening stories about all these Majinis, about all of these superhuman and unhuman creatures that are supposedly walking around everywhere, right? Time I felt this tingling feeling of what it must have been like to have, and your friend Bibi says, "Eh, who are you? Who you Nguva? Who you Majini?" You know, whatever. And you're like, okay, stop telling me that, because where I'm living on my own. And, you know, so it was one of those moments where I thought, wow, this is magic. This is powerful. This story has stayed in my head. Is still haunting me, but it also inspired me. But I think also, I have to say, Koyo, the idea of the water woman for me was about movement and being able to move back and forth and around. A lot of my collage works, I've noticed even, would sit on the ground, or would stand on the ground, or would be implanted on some kind of terrestrial plate, right? And the minute I created the water woman, I opened up the possibility for return. And it was a spell that I hoped for.
Yeah.
And it was a prayer that I hoped for. But I also really wanted to move back and forth. I wanted to keep the relationships and the connection to New York, because New York has been a home for me longer than my home of birth. And I know what
Yeah.
it provides
Yeah.
me, you know. I know, and I wanted this second chapter to be a challenge of investigating this power base, this root of my African black.
Yeah. Going back, going back to New York, you
Back to
know,
New York.
we are all aware, and we are all hurting again, with this rage that is roaring across the world, you know, as a response, as another form of resistance towards the what I call the very perverted and obsessive fascination of whiteness with our bodies.
Correct.
That really has multiple very
dimensions and
hurtful, very
absolutely.
difficult, horrible, appalling expressions. So I really also seen that, you know, the how do you, I mean, the idea of blackness, we all know it's a very complex idea, but it's very important for me to always recognize how much of the African American experience, and also the African American ethos of, you know, push for freedom, push for rights, push for liberations, has also informed the African trajectory in terms of, you know, liberations and political sovereignty. I guess what I want to get at is really to understand how you, as an artist, as an African artist who has spent, you know, as I said initially, your formative years of practice in the US, now living back here, how do you deal, or how do you work or live blackness in, you know, on such grounds? And how do you feel today seeing what is going on in the world? towards
that's a
us.
really
I always say
heavy
us because I tend not to,
yes,
yeah.
no, I think so, and I think that's actually the key. The idea of separating people, selling people off was about also let's okay, so I'm going to start from here, which is where I am. I'm in Nairobi right now. I wouldn't be
Yeah.
doing this. I wouldn't be able to function the way I do if I hadn't taken this journey the way I did. And when I took this journey the way I did, I had guardians along the way. And I learned so much about this big quiet that I'm talking about from my African American brothers and sisters who have worked tremendously to understand Blackness, which is one of the most monolithic and opaque ideas, and to fragment it and turn it into these incredible spaces of discussion is one of the most powerful things. All of these voices that we're hearing are Blacknesses speaking, right? Types of Blacknesses. That fight is a lot, has been a Blackness fought for the truth to be told within the United States. We have to pursue the same fights in our distinct, but still unified Black countries. We're majority Black people, right? And as you know, we talked about this, and I've talked about it with so many people. Police brutality is a horrific and enormous and extremely repetitive action here. You see it all the time, and in fact, right when the COVID measures were passed, it was horrific to see how the poor were targeted, right? How the invisible Black Africans were targeted, told to go home, wear masks, arrested, beaten.
Across the continent.
Across the continent, yeah? And so is police brutality a racist activity? Or is it an activity of patriarchy, power gone wrong? And this moment right now is here to make us all ask these questions. And what are we going to do about what's happening in our countries? What are we going to do that's happening with all the brutality in South Africa against women's bodies is unspeakable. The brutality here against poor people and women is unspeakable. And they need, and these things need to be spoken about, right? So, but I do think that we need to come up with chapters of protest and different battles. We have to attack this thing from many different angles. And we have to reclaim space through these battles, right? And they have to happen abortion and legal. We have to go to those places that allow women to live in dignity, our mothers to live in dignity, and the mothers to be to live in dignity, and the men too. And I think what we're learning, definitely in this very loud moment, is that images of the body are important. You know, I always say, you know, the crucifixion of Christ. I went to Catholic school. I'm completely Catholically educated. And the thing about the crucifixion for me is that it was one of the most powerful.
Me too, totally.
I mean, it's
polluted by Jesuit education.
Oh boy, right. I had nuns, and I have to say, you know, one of the most amazing, important things for me was the imagery in Catholicism, and the Catholic Church played such a huge role in visual education, right? And it comes back to haunt me, the body as a place where transcendence and torture, like 2,000 something years ago, right? And it happened through this one revolution. I'm not a Christian, I'm not preaching, but I was going to say the replication of that image again and again and again and again is what we think we can live off of. But meanwhile, these lynchings, these crucifixions that are happening day after day after day, we need to rally up around those moments, right? And they're happening in our constituents, in our countries, in the same way that George Floyd was horribly murdered. Except there is that conundrum where Black policemen, right, who've internalized, who've learned the language of violence, oppression, and absolute cruelty
Absolutely. Yeah.
and impunity, by the way, because
Yeah.
they're not going to be tried, arrested, none of it, right? So they're fine, and whatever they do, they can throw that body and nobody's going to say anything. And
Yeah.
especially if it's a poor person,
Yeah.
who are they going to go to?
Yeah. Yeah.
Those battles are ours to come up
Yeah.
with and ours to fight. We have to come up with the languages, be it through, I said, through art, through writing, and
Absolutely.
yeah.
When you and let me interject here. And when you talk languages, you know, I've been really kind not obsessed, but even though I'm a quite obsessive person, but I've been really very curious and concerned about understanding of various lexicon and particularly and understanding you know, different artistic lexicon and individual vocabularies by individual artists. And I've come to sort of see that, you know, as much as, you know, we look at, I don't know, we look at economists to understand economy. We look at, you know, scientists to understand science and so on and so on.
Yeah.
And we look at a lot at social scientists to understand societies, you know, to understand history, to understand politics within society. And there is such a wealth of social science production coming out of artistic practice, because I strongly believe that artistic practice is another form of social science that is using the visual and aesthetic vocabulary that is not speech or that is not writing. But at the same time, I believe there is not yet enough recognition of the role of artists as social scientists. I mean, if one looks at femininity, feminism, assertiveness, and you know, spirituality, you know, political imagination, if you want, social imagination, preservation, you know. So where do you place yourself in that? You know, do you see your practice as a form of writing social science with another vocabulary, or do you because I want to equate aesthetic and visual practice with speech and writing,
right?
Because for me they are totally equal.
Well, I mean, for me, I
But
do.
I know that we still have to sort of, yeah. Go
I mean,
ahead.
I much prefer to make art than talk. I like talking to you, but I much prefer to be in the studio just working, because I think it is a language and it is a means of connecting. But I think the connection needs to happen from the inside first, right? You need to connect with what is it that we've been making art way before we were writing books, way before all of this amazing technology that we have, even the most basic things existed. We've been making art in the museums of the rocks and the museums of the walls of all of our amazing countries and continents. So there's something very innate and something very powerful about the need and the desire to make. We were scared of this lightning. It was dark. We don't know who's going to come and eat us. And so people spoke through art, right? And they left testaments of their fears and their power and their desires and their hopes on these ancient museums, right? And then art moves onto the body. It has moved with the body, right? And art has been placed upon the body. Language, archives, libraries, information has been written upon the bodies of men and women for thousands of years, right? And that's another art. That's another language and another way of speaking that people recognize. It's ephemeral because, of course, you'll bury the body and it'll go, but it's a way of communicating. And that's how we got to this point anyway, you know? So for me, art is a language that has pushed us to this point. Now that we're at this point, why do we believe that we're the cat's meow? We are the most superior species. We can do no harm. We can treat people badly and not suffer the consequences. We can hide hundreds of years of discrimination and torture, and hopefully they won't protest too much, right? How do we get to that point? And I think artists, and I'm a sensitive artist in that way. I emote a lot through my work, but I think because of that, they're tapping into a human recognized moment. You know, there's no way you can say all of these things that have happened over these hundreds of years, be they colonization, slave trade, discrimination of all kinds. You can't say people don't know, didn't know it was wrong, right? They didn't understand, it wasn't quite aware. There's only certain ways to talk about it whilst it's happening, as you're protesting, and also to hold space, right? Historical space, meaning to create things that will say that are markers of this moment and say, yes, this happened at this point. We saw these cruelties. We saw this taking place. We saw this bloodshed, right? Otherwise, we've just got these institutions sitting on these graves that are full of bodies and voices and information that need to be exorcised. And this is what I think artists do. I believe my job is to exorcise this institutional rigidity and this masculine fear of taking back the earth and asking it to forgive us, and coming to terms with the fact that we can live on this planet together equally. Easy, you're gonna have to sacrifice, but it is possible. How is that a social science? I'm not sure, but I think it is a trend in this. This shouldn't be happening in this way. And because it's happening, we need to understand why. How are the governments culpable? How is the leadership completely tied into all of these things? And I think that the artists are
also particularly and also connecting it into a pattern, you know, into a system, particularly when it comes to racism against us, you know. And in a way, you said it very beautifully. I cannot say it better, but you said something that I would like to come back to. You said that all this information that has been stored into our bodies from generation since multiple generations, but the body dies and it lives. I believe that no, because if you look at us. We are contemporary, smart, beautiful African women, you know, and we didn't necessarily live through the same kind of harsh hardship that, you know, generations before us went through in terms of colonization, segregation in the US and so on. But at the same time, we still have, I don't even want to talk about the stigma, but we still have that kind of consciousness. So there is a kind of a legacy of hereditarian kind of transmission that is given. I call it abstract because I am kind of poor of a more appropriate vocabulary. But what I want to say is that there is this ungraspable, undescribable, I don't know if you say it in English, legacy that we carry and that we get from our mother, from our grandmothers, 100%. From our great-grandmothers, those who have the luxury of having had this generation I had, and to understand how as a member of any given family or society, you have this responsibility of pushing forward,
Yes,
you know.
I believe
So
that.
I strongly believe that where, regardless of the fact that yes, we die, but
It's inside of
there
us,
is a
absolutely.
transmission,
Yeah,
you know,
no,
because
you're absolutely right. I think
exactly,
those
and it's a
generations,
DNA as you call it. Yeah.
it is a DNA. It's a DNA of information. It's a DNA of evolution. It's a DNA that is heard by those who listen, and by those, I think, who are really aware and connected and conscious and open to being as human as possible. I mean, that's the point of it, is that you look at other people and you see in their eyes another human being, right? And you're able to transmit that compassion through
Yeah.
work, that power, that I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to keep this safe. I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to help you get through this. I'm going to help us get through this through your work, because it's a human, it's a long human vein going all the way back, but it's also, I think, held by
Yeah.
the bodies of people who understand what it takes to survive such hardship. What it's taken to survive all of this
Exactly.
gives us the
Exactly.
strength to be able to hold on to it, because we're like, I'm not letting go of
Exactly.
it. Wherever it
Yeah.
sits in your brain, in your
Yeah.
womb, in
Yeah.
your all
Yeah.
of it. And I think the brain is in every
Yeah.
single part of the body. I always argue tiny, tiny little
Mm-hmm.
creatures sitting around, fearful of tomorrow,
Yeah.
fearful of yesterday, right? And it
Mm-hmm.
takes the courage, I think,
Yeah.
of artists to say,
Mm-hmm.
it's okay, let's look at the scary stuff and let's hold on and let's come up with a
Mm-hmm.
language to defeat
Yeah.
this horror that people have
Mm-hmm.
determined as our fate. It's
Mm-hmm.
not.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
And I come to reveal a lot of things, you know,
I
again,
agree.
so
Yes.
to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And it reminded me very strongly, as if it needed, didn't this, you know, the generosity of nature. The generosity of
Yeah.
nature in the sense that uh, we are going through this pandemic, which is revealing every single society and even every single family, every single kind of relationship, every single individual. It is revealing so much to us again.
Do you?
And many of
Mm-hmm.
these things, and when you talk about returning to humanity, and many of these things, for me, the bottom line is the reminder of the importance of humanity,
Yes.
being human, being considerate,
Right.
being careful, being protective, being, you know, all of these things that make actually human life make sense. But of course, patriarchy, racism, white supremacy, capitalism, you name it, are all these totally perverted systems that we produce as well
Yeah.
somehow. I mean, and we partake in many ways. But I keep thinking that I'm locked down now since 3.5 months
Yeah.
in
Yeah, we
Cape
have too.
Town.
Yeah.
Uh, I've gone through multiple. What I'm strongly seeing is that if we don't take this opportunity
To
to
learn.
understand
To
that
yes.
we were running to
Yes, we
learn,
all
and
were.
we were
Yeah.
running a totally, you know, failure meal.
Yeah.
So how does it, how was your experience,
I was gonna
or
ask
how is your experience in
how
this regard? And what's it?
I was gonna ask you how you've been able to use this moment to translate it through the institution. This what you're saying, this knowledge, this intuition, this compassion that we're all having to regard each other with.
Mhm.
And I want to know. I want to know because I feel something is happening that, by the way, you're closed down, which is
Mhm.
difficult for you. I'm, kind of stuck in this amazing studio, able to work, which is amazing for me because I'm not up and down in a plane. I'm here with my kids. I'm learning them more than I ever
Mhm.
thought I could. But I'm curious, how do you translate this knowledge into an institution? And I'm also curious because this is happening in Nairobi. There's institutions, formative institutions, little small, amazing energies to begin institutions. How do you take what we've learned and make sure that we don't repeat all of this nonsense.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, I say it first on a personal level. I think we bring our personality into our
Yes,
work, and on a personal level, you
love
know,
this.
grasp the
I
whole
love it.
visible
I'm like,
space.
yeah.
So, and uh, and uh, and
Witches know witches.
I draw a lot from that. And that, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and which is a space where, so when the pandemic was declared and everything started unraveling early March, at least in our part of the world, early March, um, and the global anxiety broke out. I really think that I understood. I took it as a moment of retreat.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
personal retreat, institutional retreat,
yeah,
and also as a moment of reflection.
yes.
A lot of organizations, sort of, particularly museums, as you know, the
They
went very
panicked.
quick
Yeah,
in, you know,
yeah,
taking decisions
yeah.
in panic. And, you
Mm-hmm.
know, I was totally shocked to
Yeah,
see what is happening in Europe and
yeah,
in America
yeah.
on the basis of institution.
Mm-hmm.
And we here at Zeitz MOCAA, I mean, for me as the director, it was very important for me that I protect the jobs
Yeah,
and
yeah,
that the staff is safe.
yeah.
So this is really was my main focus, and I have to say that we achieved that quite well, and then as it unfolded, to understand in 2 or 3 months,
No,
it will not end in 6 months.
no.
So there is a certain mental kind of adjustment that we all need to make, and all
Yeah,
need to understand that we have to live with this for a longer time. And what is it bringing us? You know, the deacceleration is important, I
absolutely.
think,
Yeah,
and the sort of reconnection with the real, if we
yes,
were not disconnected, but really grounding ourselves more into what really makes sense
absolutely.
for,
Yeah.
you know, human
And
development.
it's
So I
interesting.
am
It's
I am more
on
on
that plane. Yes,
yeah,
yes, I am too. And but I also think
yeah,
it's
exactly.
amazing how we've been able to look at countries vis-a-vis this little
Yeah.
virus and see exactly who they are, exactly what they're capable
Mm-hmm.
of and what they're absolutely not capable of.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's such a wisdom in the earth. There's so much that we wouldn't want to be happening, but at the same time, it's given us this incredible lens, and clarity is one of the things I think that we were lacking with all of this information and movement and images and Instagrams and, you know, social, all this stuff clogs up essentially what is really being transmitted and told to us from within and from outside of us, which is this earth is going to toss us off, it's going to shake us off. And
Yeah. And I also see that, yeah, it also reveals what we already know,
yeah,
the super asymmetry of power,
yes,
you know.
yeah,
And I hate to say it, but as an African woman, I cannot not, you know,
say
notice
it.
that, you know.
Yeah,
And what I
absolutely.
call the asymmetry of power seen through COVID is the panic that unraveled in Europe. I mean, it's heartbreaking
Yeah.
about all these people who are losing their lives. Uh, but at the same time, you know, the prediction that were given for the continent, you know, the
Oh,
idea that, oh, when COVID arrives in Africa, we would basically be disseminated, you know, we would basically be
exactly.
erased
Yes.
because we will die by the millions. But we are the one who are doing best, you know, so
Absolutely.
far. So
Absolutely.
I
So
really
far. And
think
I
that
think
there is so much, you know, there is so much. Yeah, so far.
there's a lot, there's
Yes.
so much to
We have
learn.
1 minute left.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah, there we have 1 minute left,
mhm.
and there is one question. I mean, I could go on with Wangechi like this forever. There is one question. So many ideas. Are you two going to do a workshop Well, we are workshopping now.
Right now.
I don't know what that means.
Get your homework.
Yeah.
Get your homework
So
out.
thank you so much.
Thank
We
you,
have
Koyo.
19 seconds left.
No, I
Thank you
just want
so
to say
much,
thank
my
you very
dear.
much. What a pleasure.
All good things in
Yes,
Nairobi.
keep going and keep doing your thing.
Yeah.
And I
Take
hope to
good
see
care
you
of
soon.
yourself.
And you too.
Many
You too.
kisses to the girls
Thank
and
you.
to Mario.
Absolutely.
And many kisses to you.